She began leaving spoons in the sink, the way people leave unfinished thoughts on the edge of a sentence, and somehow that's the first thing remembered when the story is asked to start somewhere honest. The spoons, the thin smear of coffee in the bowl of each, the way the metal caught the muted light from our single north-facing window and refused to shine. The apartment had its own weather. Gray, the hum of distant traffic like a low tide inside the walls, a draft that always found the cuffs of sleeves before finding the skin beneath. Dinner cooled between us most nights, steam rising in thin lines like secrets escaping, then disappearing as if they were never there. Words tried to be words, then fell apart midair. She smiled without teeth, a soft, practiced kindness that made the chair opposite feel further away than it was. Rain pressed its knuckles to the glass and drummed a patient rhythm, a metronome for something coming undone. Rain is good at that, at making endings feel formal, at saying what quiet mouths won't. There's a moment you start narrating life in present tense to yourself, like a film voiceover, trying to keep pace with a scene that keeps refusing to stop. The plate is warm, the chair is empty, the door is a held breath, her phone is face down, screen pulsing with that soft white strobe of a notification trying not to be seen. The city stays ordinary beyond the window. A bus sighing to a halt, a motorbike threading through puddles, two teenagers sprinting and laughing under a small umbrella. The ordinary is cruel in its refusal to mark a page for you. It thinks you should keep walking, keep stirring sauce, keep nodding at the non-events that make up a Thursday evening. She said work was heavy this week, and the words heavy and weak leaned on each other the way she didn't lean on me. I said nothing. The silence made more sense than anything else. Silence is fluent in households like this, shorthand for grief and the stubbornness that hides under love. If you need a single image for distance, it's this. Two mugs on the table, both slightly off-center from their coasters, as if neither of us trusted the circle drawn for us. I watched her fingers whenever she reached for anything, because the body talks even when the mouth lies by omission. Her right thumb had a new habit, rubbing the knuckle of her ring finger like polishing a thought. The ring was still there, but the gesture suggested she was rehearsing its absence. I went to the sink, ran water hotter than necessary, let steam paint the window. Water has a way of replacing the sound of voices. It's comforting until it's not. The phone pulsed again in the living room, a small lighthouse for someone else's shoreline. I dried my hands slowly, and that's a sentence that tells you more about fear than it does about towels. Discovery wasn't cinematic. No raised voices, no plates thrown, no sherbet-bright drama to sell. Just a notification lighting the edge of the table, a name I didn't recognize, and a preview of a message abbreviated by the phone's polite need to censor intimacy. Can't stop thinking about. It's amazing how ellipses can perform surgery. Everything drops out of your chest and leaves behind a careful outline. I didn't pick up the phone, didn't need to. I already knew the voice that would be waiting at the end of that thread. Not a villain, just an echo. It's always this way. People with soft wrists and ordinary jackets and a laugh that makes a person feel temporarily forgiven. I walked to the window. Rain found a seam and worked it into a trickle along the frame. She came out of the bedroom like someone entering a room that's already been evacuated. "You okay?" she asked, which is what we ask when we aren't. I said, "Yeah." It sounded like a key dropped in carpet. There's a gift bag on the console table in the entryway, blue tissue paper like calm ocean. The neat white rope handles she keeps to reuse because she hates waste. I had bought it earlier that day, which is how the universe plays its jokes small and in good taste. Inside, a scarf the color of early morning, soft enough to pass for tenderness. A note folded twice. For the days that feel colder than they are. The sort of sentence you write when you're trying to build a bridge with thread. I stared at it and thought, if I give this now, it becomes a prop. If I hide it, it becomes evidence. She noticed the bag and said my name. How she said it told me she'd already left the room in her mind. Love is geography. Some migrations happen without a suitcase. Later that night, dinner intact but barely touched. We sat with a movie paused at the opening frames, the studio logo frozen like a coin on its edge. She tucked her feet under herself and folded into the couch's corner, creating that small private geography within our shared geography. My hands remembered making things for her. Shelves that didn't hang perfectly straight, pancakes on Sundays shaped like the states we'd never visit. Memory obeys no traffic laws. It sped, it braked. It reversed into scenes where we were newly in love and not careful yet. She reached for her phone without thinking, the most honest kind of reach, and then thought better of it, which was also honest in its way. Thunder stitched itself into the distance. The apartment's clock ticked like an animal trying not to be caught. When the message finally came through with a full sentence exposed, when the banner didn't cut it off, when the ellipses ended their work, the room changed density. Tomorrow, same place, it said, and sometimes the smallest question is heavier than a lifetime. The gift bag looked childish now, a drawing held up by a hopeful kid to a parent on a phone call. She watched me not reading the message, the way a person watches a glass about to fall. There's a cowardice in both of us here that deserves to be recorded. She didn't confess, and I didn't ask. We were partners in the preservation of a few more hours. You tell yourself that makes you dignified. You tell yourself anything that helps you walk into the next room without tipping over. At some point, the rain became softer, like sin forgiven for the night. She went to shower, the sound of water again, a privacy you don't break even when everything else is broken. I stood at the console table and took the note from the bag, smoothed it flat, then folded it a third time, like pressing a crease into hope. The scarf remained pale and useless. I put the bag back. I left it where she would see it in the morning, because hope is stupid and stubborn and refuses to read the signs. I thought about the word gift and how it means poison in another language, and then decided that was too neat, too clever, and that real heartbreak doesn't care for wordplay. Still, the thought stayed. When she came back, hair damp, skin smelling like almond and rain, she saw the bag and said, "Half a question, for me." Her voice did something fragile at the end of the me. I nodded. She didn't touch it, not yet, as if opening it would obligate her to a script we both knew she couldn't follow. We watched the paused logo glow and dim, the TV trying to sleep. She leaned her head on my shoulder like an apology that couldn't manage the words. We stayed like that long enough to make the quiet feel like a decision. Then, somewhere between thunder's tale and traffic's lullaby, she said, "I'm tired," and went to bed, leaving the bag to keep vigil with me. At 2:11 a.m., sleeplessness pressed its heavy hand upon my chest and asked for permission it didn't need. I stood in the kitchen and drank water that tasted like old coins. I told myself I would wait until morning. That morning would be gentler. That mornings are built for beginnings. The radiator clicked like a nervous metronome. The scarf waited in its paper cradle, light as a lie told to protect someone you love. When I finally let my head find the table, cheek against wood, the city kept humming, uninvested and exact. The cliff arrives quietly. The realization that tomorrow isn't a question. It's an appointment she already made. The gift bag looked back at me as if it knew the punchline I wasn't ready to hear. Sleep didn't happen. It scattered and hid in corners like a cat under a bed you can't move. Morning found me anyway, pale and early, with the kind of light that makes you honest even if you're not ready. Morning light is merciless and kind at the same time. It lays everything out, forgives nothing, and somehow promises that forgiveness is possible if you can stand to look. Coffee made its small thunder in the machine, steam, aroma, ritual. It was a comfort the way a handrail is comforting when the stairs are long. She came out in a sweater that tried to make a season for us. Her eyes were quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a late conversation with someone who shouldn't have that much of your time. She saw the gift bag again and smiled like a person in a photograph, not the person in the kitchen. Her phone stayed face down, but that's not how truth lies. Truth is in the body. The way she avoided the corner where we used to dance on Tuesdays when we made dinner together. The way her keys went into her bag without the usual jingle, her fingers gentle as if lowering a sleeping child. The scarf waited. I told her to open it, and the sentence fell between us like a careful plank bridging two roofs in the rain. She lifted the tissue slowly, the blue folding back like early sky, and then the fabric, soft and pale, poured over her hands. Her mouth opened just enough to let air say what words couldn't. "It's beautiful," she said, and she meant it, which is what made it worse. The note remained unopened. For the days that feel colder than they are, what a ridiculous courage. After she left, the apartment learned my steps and tried to echo them back as if to convince me I wasn't alone. The rain had resigned by then. Gray lingered like the last guest at a party you didn't want in the first place. Dishes stood in a quiet argument with the sink. I cleaned them. It felt like pretending that the rules still applied. Then, like anyone who knows the house has a second owner they didn't vet, I began an audit. Not of messages, I still couldn't look, but of air. Receipts folded into the back of a drawer. A theater ticket stub from a Wednesday I remembered as a flue perfume that wasn't hers. Not exactly, more like hers wearing somebody else's memory. A hotel pen in a purse pocket we never visited. Secrets leave crumbs. I told myself I wouldn't invent a person out of crumbs, but he started to appear anyway. A jacket not cheap, brown leather worn at the elbows from leaning into things. A laugh the shape of a hand, smoothing a wrinkle out of a shirt. Small, functional, private. The kind of man who knows where the last clean glass always hides even in other people's kitchens. I hated him for being inevitable. It's easier to hate inevitabilities than to hate people. The mind merits a prize for how quickly it manufactures complete strangers while refusing to answer the phone. When the device finally rang, the name on the screen was not his, it was hers, and she was calling to ask if I needed anything from the store. Kindness rows its boat across the river of what it knows it's drowning. I said no, I said I'd cook. I said words because there was a script for ordinary days, and I wasn't ready to fire the cast. Then, because sometimes one brave thing shows up in shoes too big for it, I walked outside into air that smelled like wet concrete and city leaves in a gutter. The cafe down the block had windows that always fogged from 8 to 10 a.m., and inside people solved mornings in pairs over pastry. I sat alone and watched the door with a patience I learned from airports and doctors' offices. When he walked in, I didn't recognize him, not from my fantasy or from any corner of our life. He was smaller than my anger had hoped for, oval face, hair a little long around the collar. He ordered with the kind of voice that has practiced making someone feel like they're the only order in the room. He sat where she sometimes sat when she read. The world rarely loves a neat narrative, but sometimes it indulges. I didn't approach him. I took notes on silence instead, the way a spoon against a mug can stand in for apologies not being offered, the way streetlight reflections still lingered in puddles like stars unwilling to clock out. He looked at his phone and smiled into it with a tenderness that could have been for a sister or a pet or the woman I share a table with. He rubbed his thumb over the rim of the mug. He checked his watch like someone who isn't late because the thing he is doing is his whole point. The story wanted to make him a thief, but he read a short poem on his screen, and his face cracked open in recognition. Thieves read poems too. Monsters are human. This, more than anything, made me want to stand up and leave the cafe to the people who didn't yet know what was arriving in their mail. Back home, absence made itself busy. Her scarf, my scarf, was gone from the console. She had taken it with her. The note remained on the table, still folded twice, waiting for a third crease that would make it fit into a pocket it would never be offered. I unfolded it and placed it under the magnet on the fridge. It looked like a recipe for something we didn't own the ingredients for. The afternoon slipped into that gray hour when everything looks like a photograph. I did something ordinary, you have to anchor the day. Laundry, whites and colors separated like a young, hopeful morality. Her sweater smelled like the space between skin and winter. The dryer hummed, and in that hum I felt the apartment try to be loyal to me. Or maybe I was trying to be loyal to it. That evening, when she returned, the door paused against the latch like it was considering a different address. She came in with the softness people wear when they're braced for impact. The scarf was around her neck, a pale mourning on a night that didn't deserve one. "Thank you," she said, like the words had broken a tooth getting out. We cooked together because that's what we had taught our hands to do in times when conversation was a pleasant extra rather than a required nutrient. The pan hissed. The knife did its small math on the board. "How was your day?" Each word looked down while walking past the other. I said work was fine. She said a meeting ran long. We were both terrible at lying but excellent at not. It was later after dishes, after a show we couldn't follow, after she laughed at something and the sound sounded borrowed, that I said, "Is there someone?" The window mirrored a man I recognized and refused. She didn't answer. You can respect silence or you can call it a weapon. They're both true. Finally, she nodded like a person agreeing to weather. "I didn't plan," she started, "and plans are overrated anyway. Life prefers accidents with rehearsed excuses." "Is it him?" I surprised myself with the specific. "A cafe," I said, and watched surprise turn into the kind of careful she reserves for sharp edges. She said his name, and it was ordinary, and hearing it took nothing and everything from me at once. We made an agreement that wasn't an agreement. Space, time, the long, elastic stretch of figuring it out, which is a way to give grief a room with a door that locks from both sides. That night I took the couch. She took the bed. The apartment redistributed our breaths. At 3 a.m., the city exhaled. At 3:17, a siren tried to convince us that urgency still existed for other people. I thought about the man with the poem on his phone and wondered if he had a couch too. Dawn considered us and then postponed its verdict. The cliffhanger was quiet. Her phone lit the ceiling with a pale rectangle, and she turned it face down again, as if protecting me from a thing I already held. Days lengthen when you're counting them. Time grows indelicate, asks for proof. She stayed at her sister's 2 nights, then a friend's, then the possibility of not returning unpacked itself on the floor where her suitcase used to sit. You learn the choreography of one toothbrush. The coffee maker seems bigger when it's only for 1 cup. Rain withdrew and left a thin, clean chill in its place. The city's edges sharpened, windows brighter, voices clearer. In the morning, I took walks in a loop that ended, eventually, at our building. A shop on the corner placed a chair outside each day, empty, sturdy, expectant. Empty chairs have a way of insisting you sit with what you're avoiding. I did not sit. Her messages were simple, logistical, the kind that keep life alive while emotion sleeps off a heavy night. Picking up some clothes later. Can we talk tomorrow? I fed the fern at my sister's and it's already better than ours. The last one almost made me laugh. Our fern had been honest from the beginning in its low expectations of us. The day she came, the apartment changed temperature by a degree I felt in my teeth. Keys, the click, the pause that pause again. She entered with her hands full. A bag, a jacket, the scarf folded, and a face that carried its own weather. Guilt and resolution are difficult roommates. They stand in the same hallway not making room for each other. She set the scarf on the table, like returning a book overdue by a season. We didn't start with anything noble. We started with shoes by the door and mail on the console, and the idiocy of a catalog addressed to current resident, which felt like a joke the universe thinks is more subtle than it is. Then the talk, not a scene, a laying out of small, true things like cutlery before a meal. She had met him at a training the company sent them to, those corporate retreats where people learn how to say, align, and iterate, while their eyes seek something specific in the general vicinity of hope. He was kind, he listened. He made her feel seen in a way that made me dislike the word seen, as if my eyes had been off duty all year. I don't know what I'm doing, she said, and I believed. I wanted to tell you, she added, which is the sentence people say when what they mean is, I wanted to want to tell you. I asked nothing about the physical details. The body is a simple journalist. It reports what it's told. I was more interested in the weather. When did the air change? When did our rooms become larger than our voices? When did Tuesday dinners become the places where spoons went to sleep upright in bowls? It wasn't a plan, I said, handing her my own absolution so I wouldn't have to carry it. She cried quietly, the way clouds decide to stop pretending to be clouds. The scarf remained between us like a truce flag made by someone who still believed in flags. We tried to script an end that wouldn't wound everything. What does that even look like? Return the keys. Rotate the photographs to the back of a drawer. Change the Wi-Fi password to a cruel joke, then change it back because cruelty is too much work. She said she had told him she needed space. He respected that, she said, and I wondered what respect means in rooms where desire sits like a guest who refuses to take off their coat. I asked if she loved him. She said, I don't know what that word means right now, which was an answer scarier than yes. Love as a question mark is more dangerous than love as a period. Night found us because it always does. The apartment tried to be itself. The lamp made its old circle of light on the rug. The fridge hummed its old hymn. We stood in the kitchen because kitchens keep us honest. They smell like work and warmth and things that feed. She reached for my hand and didn't find it. Maybe I hid it, maybe she didn't really look. We breathed at each other for a while. When she finally said, I'm sorry, it landed on the table like a coin in a glass jar, a sound that means both charity and failure. I wanted to come home, she said, and the word home looked over its shoulder to see if it was still allowed in the room. There's a point in conversations like these when language runs out of room and the body takes over, her shoulders a little higher, my jaw a little tighter, both of us pretending the stove needed cleaning. We talked logistics because logistics are solvable, leases, storage, the dull heroism of cardboard boxes. And yet, she stayed, not to reclaim the bed or the old ease, but to sit with me on the floor and let our backs find the cabinet doors. We passed a glass of water back and forth like a ritual that didn't have a church. Hours behaved. The city softened. In another part of the city, a man whose name I now knew checked his phone and didn't send a message. The world held its breath to see which way we would tip. When she stood to leave for a walk, for air, for any of the nouns we used to avoid the verb, she picked up the scarf. This was kind, she said. I don't deserve kind. It's not about deserving, I said, and believed it and didn't at the same time. She wrapped it once around her neck and looked askance at the window, the same window that had made witness to our long collapse. Do you want me to come back tonight? She asked, and there it was, the small, sharp edge of a choice that isn't one. I looked at the empty chair by the table and knew it would be empty either way. Come back, I said, not to her, not to him, but to the version of us that knew how to share a room without negotiating terms. She left, the apartment inhaled. Rain threatened and then declined, leaving the streets with that almost wet smell like a promise delayed. I found myself standing by the console, fingers on the note I had magneted to the fridge. For the days that feel colder than they are. I added a second line beneath in small, unsteady letters. For when you return and don't. The pen stuttered on the cheap paper. The day leaned forward and waited for its next instruction. The cliff arrived like footsteps in the hallway, the key at the door, a pause, the scrape of metal not turning. Morning came clean, as if the sky had been washed and wrung out and hung somewhere high. The light was the good kind, the kind that forgives yesterday's dishes and makes dust look like fabric in the air. Morning light is release when you let it be. It's gentle, declarative, stubborn. Coffee steamed in 2 mugs out of habit. I set one beside the empty chair anyway. It's important to honor ghosts while they still have the courtesy to sit. The city drifted in, delivery trucks speaking their low language, a jogger's cadence upstairs, a kettle whistling through someone else's wall. The scarf lay folded on the console, a small square of quiet. She didn't come back that night. There was a message, eventually, written like a careful apology for a missed appointment, which is both exactly and not at all what this was. "I'm going to stay at my sister's for a while," she wrote. Time announced its new shape, long in one direction, narrow in the other. I answered with a sentence that felt like setting down a heavy grocery bag. Okay, acceptance is not permission. It's a kind of physics. Things fall, things land. You decide whether to stand near them. The apartment adjusted to the new math. 2 towels became 1. A pair of shoes near the door looked embarrassed and moved themselves further to the side in my head. Forgiveness arrived on morning walks, not as a revelation, but as an erosion, soft and patient. The park 2 blocks east held its due later than the others, like it enjoyed the shine. Benches offered their usual sermons on perspective. An older man fed pigeons with the solemnity of someone paying a debt. The city has its own men mending things in public, bikes, fences themselves. I sat where I'd refused to sit and watched light slice the shade into fair shapes. Forgiveness isn't a reunion. It's a reintroduction to the part of yourself that still knows the world before the bruise. I said her name in my head without attaching it to an argument. It felt like placing a book back on a shelf and stepping away without checking if it would. There were practical endings to stage. A closet to be made neutral, as if we were dressing it for a stranger. Drawers to be emptied with the care owed to any artifact that knew skin. Notes to be unfolded, read, not kept. The scarf, I considered keeping it, then didn't. It was not mine to wear, it was mine to understand. I put it in a paper bag with other items that felt like they belonged to the version of us that had done its best and failed in an honest way. Failure with honesty deserves a ceremony. I wrote a small card and tucked it in. Thank you for what we were. Be gentle where you can. Not a plea, a weather report. I didn't call him. There was nothing to say that wouldn't ask him to hold a weight he hadn't earned yet. We imagine confrontations because we think anger will save us from the work grief demands. But grief is punctual and hates to be replaced by a substitute teacher. It showed up on Thursdays, a little early, sat with me while I ate, insisted that I use the good fork because life is still life regardless of how it rearranges itself. Relief visited too, shy and brief. It lives in clean sinks and open windows and getting the measure of a room again. Both could stay, both did. When she finally came to collect the last of her things, it was a Sunday with the kind of brightness that makes people in movies squint in slow motion. We were kind, we were small. We didn't try to give the moment a speech it couldn't carry. She thanked me for packing things carefully. I thanked her for leaving the fern with my name on a small paper flag stuck into the soil. She cried in the way that won't ruin makeup, then let it ruin makeup anyway. "I'm sorry," she said, and the words had grown into a different shape, less coin, more seed. I nodded because something inside me was already nodding without me. At the door, she hesitated and looked back like people do when they are checking whether the place they've been is going to collapse without them. It didn't. The chair was still a chair. The window still held the city without shaking. "I hope you," she began, then stopped. "We smile in that place where language blows a fuse. Take care," she said, one of the truest sentences, boring and exact. After the door closed, the apartment and I listened to each other breathe. Morning slid into late afternoon with no sudden moves. The gift bag, emptied, collapsed into itself on the console. Even props retire. Later, rain returned, not a storm, just a brief rehearsal, an apology for absence. It tapped the glass like someone asking politely to be let in to say what it had to say. The light in the room softened into the color that flatters everything. I made tea instead of coffee. The kettle's blue flame, the rise of steam, the pause before the pour. Small, ordinary, resolute. Letting go turned out not to be a dramatic exit, but a series of tiny choices made without witnesses. New towels, a different playlist, learning to eat at the table again because the table deserves to be used. I opened the window enough to let the cool out and the city in. The room inhaled and exhaled with me. On the fridge, the note remained, for the days that feel colder than they are. Beneath it, my second line. Beneath that, I added a third, smaller still, and for the morning that finally warms. I stood there long enough to earn it. The mug was warm in my hands. The chair opposite was empty and not a threat. The hum of traffic stretched like a slow river, and the rain stopped mid-sentence, as if remembering something urgent elsewhere. The unresolved moment was gentle, a thin band of sunlight on the floor, edging toward the chair, not reaching it yet, promising nothing except movement. Chair, not reaching it yet, promising nothing except movement.